the spooks out there. Welcome back to another episode of Spine Chilling Chats, where we dig up the darkest corners of true crime, history, folklore, and the supernatural to give you a reason to leave the lights on tonight. I'm Ange.
And I'm Amanda.
If this is your first time listening, welcome. It's always nice to find another kindred spirit out in the world. If this isn't your first time, welcome back. We love this little family that we're creating together.
Yes.
Tonight, we're diving into one of the darkest stories to ever come out of Kansas City. So grab your coziest blanket, double check that the doors are locked, and get ready for a tale that's as unsettling as it is unforgettable. Because here on Spine Chilling Chats, the truth is always darker than fiction. As a trigger warning, this episode does discuss animal torture and killing, rape, torture, murder, and dismemberment of young men. So please take care while listening. On January 31st, 1949, Robert Andrew Berdella Sr., a die setter for the Ford Motor Company, and his wife Mary Louise gave birth to their first son, Robert Berdella Jr., in Cuyahoga Falls, Ohio, which we're near Ohio, and it's a boring state. There is nothing going on in Ohio. It's just having to drive through Ohio. Yeah, That's exactly what it's like driving through Ohio.
Yeah.
It's just one giant yawn.
Yep.
7 years later, they would welcome their second son, Daniel, who would quickly become their father's favorite. Robert's father was a devout Catholic. The family regularly attended Mass, and both of the boys regularly attended religious educational courses. Robert was fairly intelligent as a kid, but kept to himself mostly. He rarely played outside his home and very seldomly had friends over to play. Robert had a speech impediment, which didn't help the thick Coke bottle glasses he had to wear due to being so nearsighted. He was also diagnosed with high blood pressure and had to take medication for it. With all that in his way, being athletic wasn't really in the cards for him.
How old was he?
A kid. This is when
With high blood pressure and all that? Wow.
I had high blood pressure as a kid, but every time I would go, the doctors just assumed it was nervousness, and so they wrote it off. But really, I've always had high blood pressure. But his little brother, Daniel, was everything their dad had hoped for in a son. He was great at sports from a young age. Their father valued sports and physical education, and he viewed his son as a failure since he was not interested in sports, and often punished Robert by whipping him with a leather strap, often physically and emotionally abusing him. It did say that he abused both sons, although Daniel got, the least of it because he was the favorite. But they both were abused. Robert did pretty well in school, even with being difficult to teach due to his indifference to others, which I think might have been more of a defense mechanism due to everybody bullying him. Like, he was getting bullied at school because of his being kind of weak and big Coke bottle glasses and the speech impediment. And then going home and having his father abuse him and think little of him. So I think probably being withdrawn and not really wanting to socialize might have stemmed from that. But I'm not a doctor. I don't know.
Right.
When Robert started going through puberty, he discovered he was gay. He kept his secret well guarded until he was much older, even going so far as to briefly having a girlfriend in his early teens. By the time he hit his mid-teens, Robert showed signs of aggression. He became a real asshole to others, especially to women.
Sorry, off subject. You said asshole. My dad said, I listened to a couple of your episodes. And I said, yeah. He goes, man, what a potty mouth you have. And I was like, well, don't listen. I don't know what to tell you. He said, dropping the F-bomb all the time. And I was like, what?
I know. I've tried to cut back a lot
too.
on how much I cuss because I don't want to offend
Me too.
others.
I try. But I was just cracking up because he was like, I actually watched a couple of your episodes, and man, you got a potty mouth. And I was like, oh.
My parents won't watch.
I said, oh, I mean, I get it from you, Dad. So anyway, I thought that was funny.
That is funny. He also took an interest in art and cooking. He developed a flair for showmanship. In 1965, Robert saw the film adaptation of the John Fowles novel, The Collector. The plot of the film revolves around a disturbed man who stalks and then abducts a young woman whom he finds attractive, holding her captive in his windowless stone basement and viewing her as little more than an attractive specimen. After several weeks, the woman dies of a contracted illness despite her captor's efforts to keep her alive. Robert later stated that this movie had formed a lasting impression on him. He and his family drove to Canton, Ohio on Christmas Day in 1965 to visit relatives. That evening, Robert's father had a heart attack and passed away when Robert's father was 39. Robert was 16, getting ready to turn 17 the following month. This had a major effect on Robert, and even though his father had been horrible to him, Robert looked to Catholicism for comfort. Like, even though his dad was an asshole, he's still, it affects you when a parent dies.
Yeah. I mean, it affects you in different ways if your dad was an asshole or abusive or whatever, but he's still your dad.
Yeah. So he looked to Catholicism for comfort. That's how he was raised and what he knew. He read about many different faiths when he could not find comfort in that way. And in the end, he became very cynical about all religions. His mother remarried shortly afterwards, and Robert resented her for this, making his anger grow as he saw it as a betrayal to his father. He withdrew from socializing even more and immersed himself in the solitary activities he had participated in since childhood, such as painting, collecting coins and stamps, and writing to foreign pen pals. Robert would later claim that his hobby of writing to pen pals in countries such as Vietnam and Burma, and then them sending him stamps and photographs of mythical or historical icons, ancient cultures, and architecture, would lead to his love of primitive art, photographs, and antiques. He also, unfortunately, claimed that around this time, he was sexually assaulted by a male co-worker at a restaurant that he was working at. Throughout his studies in high school, he had earned such excellent grades and showed such potential that in 1966, one teacher had placed him in an independent study program, and in the summer of 1967, Robert graduated from Cuyahoga Falls High School. So although, he's really withdrawn, he's still a good student. He's very intelligent, but he just doesn't really apply himself well. When Robert was 18, he enrolled in the Kansas City Art Institute in the hopes of becoming a professor, but instead found his calling as a chef. In his first year at KCAI, Robert was considered an attentive and talented student, although by his second year, he became vocally anti-authoritarian. During his time at school, he began engaging in animal torture. He tortured a chicken, experimented with sedatives and tranquilizers on a dog, and then he decapitated a duck in front of his peers. That's one of the signs, serial killer is one of them, is, the torturing animals. Yeah. He also started abusing alcohol and selling drugs. He was arrested for attempting to sell methamphetamine to an undercover officer. He was released after posting a $3,000 bond, which is equivalent to $27,200 as of 2025. So that's a decent amount.
Mm-hmm.
He later pleaded guilty to the offense and was handed a 5-year suspended sentence. 1 month after his first arrest, Robert and 2 other students were arrested again for possession of marijuana and LSD in Johnson County. This time, Robert couldn't post bond, so he spent 5 days in jail. The charges against him and one of the other students would be dropped due to a lack of evidence. In 1969, Robert voluntarily withdrew from KCAI after receiving harsh criticism from college administrators for killing and cooking a duck for the sake of art. So I wonder if that was the duck he decapitated. But he must have done it in such a way where it wasn't, because he was going, learning to be a chef.
Yeah.
So, I mean, you're going to have to
Kill
poultry.
in
So
some areas. Yeah.
I wonder if it's the manner in which he did it. Like, did he make a spectacle of it?
Right. Or did he just do it
Or do it cruelly?
Well, it says in the name of art. So when people do something artistic, it's usually this big, huge
spectacle.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
He might
have done that, yeah.
He began working as a short order cook in various restaurants around Kansas City in an attempt to pay the lawyer fees and fines accrued from his previous drug arrests. For additional income, he also sold art and antiques he had collected via contacts he had established in Africa, Asia, South America, and various Pacific Rim countries through his pen pals.
Okay.
He initially operated his side business from his home. Both Robert's cooking career and the antiques business took off, and by the mid-1970s, he began working as a senior cook at several renowned Kansas City restaurants. He joined the local Chefs Association and helped set up a training program for other aspiring chefs. He took part in the local Crime Prevention and Neighborhood Watch Association. So it sounds like as though he was maybe trying to turn his life around at this point,
Trying to do some good in the neighborhood and in his community.
He also came out of the closet about being gay and had a brief relationship with a Vietnam veteran. He then started hanging out with male sex workers, becoming friends and often trying to help them out of the sex work.
Okay, so he's trying to be a good person.
Yeah, it sounds like for a while there, he's really trying to do better.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe, he grew up a little bit and was like, man, what am I doing?
Right.
In 1981, now 32 years old, he gave up his job of being a chef and instead rented his own booth at the Westport Flea Market. He named it Bob's Bizarre Bazaar.
Mm-hmm.
It sold all kinds of antiques and oddities, which really sounds like my kind of store.
Mm-hmm.
I love looking at that kind of stuff. My dad used to take my brother and I to the antique stores with him. And I remember it being so boring because we weren't allowed to touch anything. Mm-hmm. And it smelled dusty in there. And it was so quiet. We couldn't talk loud. And now Robbie and I drag a roar and do the same thing.
Well, when I worked at the antique shop, I would walk around and look at everything.
I love looking at it now.
So cool, yeah.
Robert occasionally made a nice monthly profit from his booth, but overall the income wasn't enough to pay his bills. It wasn't like a steady income. To try to fix this, he would steal or scavenge items to then sell at his booth. He also rented rooms out at his house for extra income. At the flea market, Robert met a fellow merchant named Paul Howell. He operated a booth adjacent to his own. Soon, Robert met Paul Howell's younger son, Jerry. Initially, Jerry Howell and his friends bullied Robert for for his overt homosexuality. Although, according to Robert, Jerry later confided in him that he and his friends occasionally earned money as male sex workers.
Well,
Which that's just because he's a kid at this point, Jerry. Like, he's 18 maybe.
yeah, and he's
So-
32.
Yeah, so that's very young to already be into
That kind of a
I
lifestyle.
and I understand that some people, are forced into it very young, like
But he
14. But it sounds like he was
dad
living
was
with
involved.
his dad.
Yeah.
It doesn't sound like he was out on his own with no alternatives. So that just kind of surprised me. I wonder what that's about. By the early 1980s, many of his older acquaintances had ceased having any form of social contact with Robert. Robert increasingly relied on the young male sex workers as a source of companionship and friendship. He later said to have become increasingly frustrated that many of them were ignorant of his efforts to help steer them away from self-destructive behavior. Which, again, that's very arrogant of him. Because he also has very self-destructive tendencies, so it's kind of like the kettle calling the pot black.
Yeah. Yeah.
You're judging them, yet, you haven't always been
On the up and up.
Yeah. He would often engage in sexual relations with the men he befriended, also establishing a degree of control over them, in part to engage in these sexual relations by loaning them money and allowing them to live rent-free at his house for periods of time. So that kind of sounds like he's using them for sex.
Mm-hmm.
He is enjoying the control he has over them because he doesn't have any other relationships in his life but these people, and he knows that they need him because they don't have anywhere else to go.
Right.
So
It doesn't really to his advantage.
Yeah, it doesn't really sound like he's trying to really steer them away from their self-destructive behavior. If anything, he's kind of enabling them by, hey, if you sleep with me, I'll give you a place to live.
Not really trying to get him out of that lifestyle.
No, that sounds more like.
But saying that he is, because if they sleep with him, then they have somewhere to stay. That's still the same lifestyle.
Yeah, that's just you benefiting from it. His neighbors described Robert as flamboyant, but thought he was helpful and civic-minded, despite the generally messy state of his property and his somewhat snobby attitude. Paul Howell relocated his business to a store close to the intersection of 39th and Main Street, with his family living in an apartment above the shop. Robert remained a casual friend of the family, offering his assistance if Jerry encountered any minor scrapes with the law. By the summer of 1984, Jerry Howell had turned 19, and this, my friends, is where it turns dark.
Oh.
On July 5th, 1984, at the age of 35, Robert killed 19-year-old Jerry Howell, who was believed to be Robert's first victim.
Okay.
Robert had promised to drive Jerry to Merriam to attend a dance contest. Robert later suggested that he gave Jerry alcohol, diazepam, and acepromazine, both in his car and at his home until Jerry was unconscious. He then injected Jerry with a heavy tranquilizer before he bound him to his bed. Which, where is he getting these drugs?
Where did any of them get these drugs from?
Like, he has no connections, though. Like, you work at
he might with the people that he sleeps with
to get tranquilizers and.
Because usually the junkies are the ones that are trying to get the drugs. You wouldn't get it from the junkie, so I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know how he got them either. There, Robert kept Jerry restrained for 28 hours. Throughout those 28 hours, Jerry was repeatedly drugged, tortured, raped, and violated with foreign objects.
Mm.
Robert ignored Jerry's questions of why he was doing this and pleased to be released. Because remember, Jerry thought he was a friend of the family.
Yeah.
Like, Robert knew his dad. They had booths next to each other, you know. According to Robert, Jerry died either from asphyxiating on his own vomit or a combination of the gag and the medicines being too strong for him to be able to catch a breath.
Mm-hmm.
Robert claimed that he briefly attempted CPR to bring Jerry back, but quickly gave up. Then he dragged the body to the basement, where he suspended Jerry's body over a large cooking pot.
Oh, no.
Made several incisions to his inner elbows and jugular vein to drain the blood overnight. The next day, Robert dismembered Jerry's body using a chainsaw and boning knives. He wrapped the pieces in newspaper and trash bags. Then he placed the bags inside larger trash bags that were set out for the garbage crew to collect and take to the landfill. Which again, this, like, I actually texted Amanda asking her, have we covered this guy before? Because this sounds so familiar.
Mm-hmm.
And so then I thought that maybe I heard it on another podcast, something. I'm like, it just sounds so familiar to me. And it's because it sounds exactly like Kearney, Patrick Kearney.
Mm.
And he also was taking male sex workers, killing them, dismembering them, and putting them in trash bags.
Mm-hmm.
And his dad favored his brother because he was weak and sickly as a child. It's like their lives are parallel. Like it's so close. It was it's just two peas in a pod. When the authorities questioned Robert about Jerry's disappearance, he claimed to have driven him to Miriam as promised, where the two had then parted company close to Jerry's intended destination. Robert claimed he had not seen Jerry since. Robert kept a detailed blog that documented each sexual act and physical torture he inflicted on Jerry, which he continued with each subsequent victim afterwards. Making note of all the pleas to stop the abuse and torture, Robert would later remain adamant to investigators that this was not for his enjoyment, but for what he called his physical and mental satisfaction. Well, that's your enjoyment.
Mm-hmm.
Satisfaction is enjoyment.
Yeah.
But that was a quote, the physical and mental satisfaction. On April 10th, 1985, 20-year-old Robert Sheldon showed up at Robert's house asking to stay for a short time. He had stayed with Robert before. Robert Berdella later said that although Robert Sheldon, that's too many Roberts.
Just call him Sheldon.
Sheldon?
Yeah.
Okay. I hate using last names, so.
I know, but it'd be easier that way.
Okay, so Robert later said that although Sheldon paid his rent responsibly, he considered him to be an inconvenience. Even though Robert was not physically attracted to Sheldon, 2 days later he drugged him and held him captive because he returned home from work to find Sheldon intoxicated. Robert was adamant that he held no firm malice towards Sheldon, but saw him as someone he could, and this is a quote, express some of the anger and frustration that I had toward other people on.
So, because he's an inconvenience and he was drunk one day and he's mad at other people, he's going to now torture Sheldon.
Yes. Yeah.
Makes sense.
He's like a punching bag. But way more worse. Sheldon was drugged with sedatives and held captive in the second floor bedroom for 3 days, during which he was subjected to multiple forms of torture, such as the swabbing of drain cleaner in his left eye, the insertion, this one, the insertion of hypodermic needles beneath his fingertips.
I knew you were going to say that. Ugh.
That's what, I can't even imagine. Ugh.
I get the chills.
Yeah. You just, there's certain things that just give you the
Nothing
heebie-jeebies.
ever goes under the fingertips.
No.
Fingernails. Anything.
Man, you just barely,
Yeah.
like when I worked at Lowe's, peeling the labels off the beams, it would, after a while, it would poke you underneath your nail and it would be so sore. That's the worst pain because every time you touch anything, it just hurts.
Mm-hmm.
And I can't even imagine having actual needles. Ugh. The binding of his wrists with piano wire with the intention of permanently damaging the nerves in his hands and filling his ears with caulk to reduce his hearing capacity. So you're torturing him, you're deafening his senses, you're blinding him with drain cleaner in his eyes. That's going to make everything so much worse because you're already being tortured and now you can't use your senses to get an idea of what's going on.
Right.
That'd be even more terrifying. On April 15th, a workman came to perform some work on the roof of his house, making Robert Berdella decide to suffocate Sheldon by placing a sack over his head, which he then tightened with a piece of rope so the worker couldn't hear his victim. He later dissected Robert Sheldon's body in the third floor bathroom. That June, Robert spotted Mark Wallace hiding in his tool shed seeking shelter from a severe thunderstorm. Mark knew Robert casually, having helped him with yard work before. Robert invited Mark into his house. He noticed Mark was tense and depressed, so he offered to inject him with some chlorpromazine with the explanation that it would help calm him down and relax him. Which, why would you let anybody inject you with anything?
I don't trust people enough for that.
I don't. Unless you're my doctor, you're not shoving anything in me. Mark accepted the offer, and 30 minutes later, Robert decided to keep him as a captive. But then again, okay, this is the early 80s, so drugs were still very common. And I'm sure
those kinds of drugs are very common.
I don't even know what chlorpromazine is. Chlorpromazine.
Treats mental health conditions like schizophrenia and bipolar disorder. It regulates your mood. In addition, it can help you relax before a procedure and treat nausea, vomiting, prolonged hiccups, and more.
Okay. So again, how is he getting this? That has to be a prescription. And I'm surprised that that's an injection. Unless he's crushing up pills and turning them into, mixing with liquid and then injecting
which
them.
Is a possibility.
But that sounds scary to inject something like that.
You don't care.
I mean, I've never done any sort of recreational drug or any drug at all.
I've smoked weed, but I've never done any other drugs whatsoever, so I couldn't tell you anything either.
He carried Mark to the second floor bedroom where he endured almost a day of torture, including the application of alligator clips to his nipples, administer electric shocks to his body at any point that Mark began to become unconscious. So he's torturing him, and if he starts to pass out from the pain of torture, he'd electric shock him.
Jesus.
And those alligator clips hurt. I cannot even imagine that on your nipple. Robert recounts that 1 hour after his experimenting with hypodermic needles by inserting them into different muscles in Mark's back, Mark died from a combination of the drugs, the gag, and a lack of oxygen. Robert wrote in his log Mark's time of death at 7 p.m. on June 23, 1985. Robert answered a phone call on September 26, 1985, from an old acquaintance named James Ferris. He asked Robert if he could stay at Robert's home for a short time. Robert said that was fine, intending all the while to kidnap James. Robert arranged to meet James at a bar that evening. Despite the absolute brutality that Robert had subjected his first 3 victims to, he claimed that James was the first victim that he intentionally inflicted torture on. So what was all the other stuff?
Bullshit.
Yeah,
I call bullshit.
The
other ones were I accidentally shot him up. I accidentally stuck needles underneath his fingernails.
Yeah.
I accidentally... No.
It was all intentional torture. Robert informed investigators that there were times during his final 3 victims' periods of captivity when he ceased making additions to his abuse logs because he assumed the victim would not, and this is a quote, be able to make it much longer. So it just wasn't worth keeping track of anymore because they weren't going to last.
Right.
Robert brought James home, drugged him with crushed up tranquilizers concealed in food, then tied him to his bed before torturing him almost constantly for 27 hours. The torture included being electrocuted with 7,700 volts to the shoulder and testicles for 5 minutes each time, along with hypodermic needles being stuck in the neck and the genitals. And you might be like curious, how do we know? He's keeping logs. That's how they have all these details. They were being shocked for 5 minutes each time. He kept detailed logs of all the torturing he was doing. James gradually became delirious, but Robert continued the torture and rape until he noted in his log that James was, and this is a quote, unable to sit up more than 10 to 15 seconds, end quote. The next entry read, quote, very delayed breathing, end quote. And finally, Robert noted that James died with a slang term he had used in his career as a chef, 86, which Robert explained meant anything from throw it out to stop the project.
Mm-hmm.
No other confirmed victims are known until Todd Stoops. And I have a hard time believing that he suddenly took a break from killing, especially since he had been pretty steady with his past victims. Like, it was every few months he had another victim. And then all of a sudden,
I need a break.
Yeah, his last one was September of 1985. And then Todd is June of 1986.
9 months.
Yeah, that's a big difference from what he was doing.
Mm-hmm.
Todd Stoops was a 23-year-old that was addicted to drugs and would occasionally do sex work to feed that addiction. He and his wife lived with Robert briefly on 2 separate occasions in 1984. After Todd and his wife moved out the last time, Robert didn't see him again until by chance they ran into each other at Kansas City Liberty Memorial Park on June 17, 1986. Robert invited Todd back to his house under the pretense of having lunch, with a little sex on the side, as Todd had mentioned he needed $13 to buy some drugs. Robert later admitted to investigators that he was highly attracted to Todd physically. Robert held Todd captive for 2 weeks. He gradually upped the terror, attempting to mold Todd into a cooperative but incapacitated sex slave. Robert used the electric shocks on Todd's closed eyes in an attempt to make him blind. He also injected drain cleaner into his larynx, trying to silence his screams. In the second week of his torture, Todd begged Robert for a soft drink and sandwich. So that makes me think, like, he's not even feeding him during this time.
Yeah. Just torture.
Yeah, just torture. After Robert refused, Todd burst into tears.
Like, could you imagine being tortured and hungry at the same time?
Yeah.
That's mentally fucked up.
This whole thing is fucked up. On June 27th, Robert ruptured Todd's anal wall with his fist, causing it to bleed and discharge. Towards the end, Robert tried to feed Todd ice cream and soup, but this is a quote from Robert. Todd, quote, wasn't able to keep anything down, end quote. Gee, maybe you should have given him the sandwich a little sooner.
And not puncture his anal wall.
Yeah, not fist him. On his last day of life, Todd was so weak he was unable to breathe in a sitting position. On July 1st, 1986, Todd took his final breath. A forensic pathologist later testified that the ruptured anal wall caused septic shock, which proved fatal.
I could see that being the major cause.
Oh, yeah, because you're getting feces into your bloodstream. Although he probably didn't have a lot of feces since he wasn't being fed.
Yeah.
Robert met 20-year-old Larry Wayne Pearson in the spring of 1987 and became friends of a sort. Their friendship began when Larry entered Bob's Bizarre Bazaar and shared with Robert that as a child he had been interested in witchcraft and wizardry. Same. A little after this first meeting, Larry temporarily stayed with Robert, paying his rent and housework and odd chores. So he didn't really have to pay Robert. He was just, helping out around the house.
He's a houseboy.
Robert stated that he didn't originally intend to capture Larry, but began to form his plans to do so on June 23rd, 2 weeks after bailing Larry's butt out of jail, and Larry afterwards displaying no interest in getting a real job. Larry and Robert went to see the movie Creepshow 2 together on June 23rd before eating lunch. As the two drove around Kansas City, Larry began jokingly referring to his habit of robbing gay men in Wichita.
So I'm assuming Larry doesn't know that he's gay?
I am sure he has to know. I'm assuming.
Okay.
I'm assuming.
Okay.
That evening, Robert made sure that Larry got drunk before he injected him with chlorpromazine and moving him down into the basement. He then bound Larry's hands above his head, linked the rope he had used for this purpose to a brick column before he injected Larry's larynx with drain cleaner. He then brought an electrical transformer to the basement. Robert said that Larry was by far the most cooperative of his 6 victims. On the 5th day, by this time endured torture such as the repeated electrical shocks, having several bones broken with an iron rod to make him submissive. Robert deduced Larry had earned his trust as his continued cooperation in his sexual and physical abuse. As a sort of reward, Larry was moved to the 2nd floor bedroom, with Robert telling him that if he continued to cooperate, he would not continue to inflict as much pain upon him as he had done so while he had been in the basement. Throughout the 6 weeks he was kept there, Larry trained himself to sleep without moving so he did not antagonize Robert, and in doing so earned further torture or be made to return to the basement. After 6 weeks, Larry bit deeply into Robert's penis before screaming he could not continue with this torture. In response, Robert killed Larry by first bludgeoning him unconscious with a tree limb, which where did he have a tree limb? Like, he just had a tree limb in his bedroom?
I mean, he probably went outside and got it, but like, why? where did it, a tree limb?
You're not going to go outside to get a tree limb to bludgeon somebody after somebody bit your penis.
Who bit whose penis?
Larry bit Robert's penis.
I bet he'd be mad enough to go outside and get a limb.
I don't know. Robert then suffocated him with a bag and ligature. Robert drove himself to the hospital for treatment of the bite wound on his penis. Larry's body was later dismembered in the basement, and his head was initially stored in a plastic bag inside Robert's freezer before he buried it in the backyard. Robert abducted his last victim at 1:00 a.m. on March 29, 1988. Christopher Bryson was a 22-year-old sex worker who Robert lured to his home with the promise of payment for sex. Once in the house, Christopher was knocked unconscious with an iron bar before being bound to Robert's bed. He was then tortured in the same means as the previous victims that met their demise there. Robert, this time, swabbed Christopher's eyes with ammonia repeatedly and said to him that, and this is a quote, "The only things you need to think about are you, me, and this house." End quote. After several days, Robert told Christopher that he had begun to trust him and that although he was willing to discuss some aspects of the abuse and torture he was being subjected to, there would be absolutely no negotiation. No negotiations regarding his sexual abuse. Robert gave a firm warning, and this is a quote, "I've gotten this far with other people before, and they're dead now because of mistakes they made." End quote. By day 3, Christopher had earned enough trust to persuade Robert into establishing a daily routine of tying his hands in front of him after his sexual abuse, rather than having them tied above his head, as this was restricting the circulation in his arms. He also convinced Robert to leave the TV on in the room with the remote placed between his legs whenever Robert was out of the room. Christopher thought almost constantly about escaping. The following day, he actually managed to break free of his binding by burning them with matches from a book of matches Robert foolishly left in the room within Christopher's reach. When Robert had left the house to go to work, because he's still working throughout this time.
I was just thinking about that.
Like, how do you go to work all day, come home, torture somebody, go to bed, get up, go to work? How do you do that?
Balance work life and home life.
Yeah, that's some balance.
He managed to do that with killing and torturing people, and I can't even do it with a 20-year-old kid.
Yeah.
Who doesn't need me.
Oh,
he needs me, but he doesn't need me. And I still can't balance work life and home life.
I can. Work life is nothing.
Well, yeah.
Our job is so easy.
Our job is cake.
It's so easy.
It really is. But because I do all this shit at work, I don't want to do it at home. So
That's true.
I can't balance work life and home life.
That's true. I do slack on the housework here because, I just did it.
I'm burned out.
I don't want to do it again. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So, props to him.
Yeah. Good job. With nothing but a dog collar on, Christopher managed to escape the house by jumping from the second-story window, breaking his foot in the process. I understand. You know you're going to die if you stay there, so...
A broken bone is...
Yeah, better than death.
Alternative, yep.
He ran toward a meter reader who was walking down the opposite side of the street, yelling for him to call the police. Could you imagine you're doing your job, reading meters, and all of a sudden this naked man comes running at you with a dog collar on?
It's not funny, but I would be like, what the fuck?
I'd run away. I'd be scared.
Be like, I'm calling the cops on you.
I mean, granted, I'm a woman, so having a naked man run towards me probably is a little different than,
Who's to say the meter reader wasn't a woman?
I guess that's true. No, later it says,
Oh,
I think
okay.
it says he. Yeah, yelling for him to call the police.
Okay.
Yeah. The meter reader led Christopher to the house he had just been approaching. The owners called the police, who arrived just minutes later. When the 4 police officers questioned Christopher at the scene, he claimed he had been hitchhiking when Robert abducted him, taking him to rape and torture him in the house. He told the police he had been there for 4 days before escaping by jumping out the second floor window. He said Robert had kept him bound to a bed on the second floor of the house throughout much of the time, repeatedly sodomizing him, drugging him, and injecting his throat with drain cleaner to diminish his ability to speak loudly. As Christopher spoke, the officers also noted that in addition to the dog collar and broken foot, he had red, swollen eyes and visible scars and welts across his entire body. 2 of the officers kept surveillance of the property. A 3rd officer drove Christopher to the Menorah Medical Center for treatment, while the 4th officer radioed the Kansas City Police Department to request a formal search warrant for the property. While being questioned at a later time, Christopher told the police that Robert had showed him Polaroid pictures of men who appeared to be dead, and that he told him he would never leave the property, and that if he became a nuisance or threat, he would either be subjected to greater levels of torture or he would be killed on the spot.
Let's go with option door number 2.
Option number 3, door number 3,
What's that?
not being subjected to levels of torture, not being
I
killed.
thought that was 2.
Yeah, I wouldn't want either of those options.
But if no, I'm saying he don't have if those. That's what he said. That's what he said would happen to him.
That's what Robert told Christopher would happen to him. He'd either...
Oh, I thought Robert was saying that about himself.
No.
Oh, okay.
Robert was telling Christopher if he became a nuisance or a threat to Robert, he would either subject him to more torture or he would kill him right then.
Okay.
And Christopher didn't want either of those options.
No.
On the same afternoon of Christopher's escape, Robert was arrested and charged with sexual assault. He refused entry to his home, at which time they produced the search warrant they had requested earlier. The police found the bedroom on the second floor with burnt ropes attached to the posts at the foot of the bed, confirming Christopher's story. An electrical transformer was also found in the room, plugged into the wall with wires leading to the bed. A metal tray containing syringes, small bottles apparently containing prescription drugs, swabs, and eye drops were also close to the bed. A long iron pipe, various lengths of rope, and leather belts were present. Investigators noted that the posts on the bed had been extensively worn, suggesting that restraints had been tied to them before and that the individuals had struggled to free themselves. Investigators uncovered a human skull inside a closet on the second floor of his property and a partially decomposed human head in the backyard. The search also uncovered several human vertebrae that were scarred by both hacksaw and knife marks stowed away in a closet. That were stowed away in a hallway. Several human teeth were found in 2 envelopes. A hacksaw and miter saw were found in the basement of the property, and a chainsaw was also found soiled with bloodstains, flesh, and pubic hairs. Luminol tests showed that the floor of the basement and 2 plastic trash barrels were heavily stained with blood. 334 Polaroid pictures and 34 snapshot prints of various men were discovered. They showed Christopher Bryson and several other men, both alive and dead. Many of the images were taken while the men were being tortured. The search also uncovered numerous restraints, sexual devices, pornographic literature, hypodermic needles, and a book on narcotics. But the absolute nail in the coffin for Robert was when investigators discovered a stenographer's pad containing a very detailed log of all the torture he put each victim through. Several newspaper clippings from the Kansas City Star mentioning a missing young man named Jerry Howell, a wallet and driver's license belonging to a missing person named James Ferris, were discovered in a closet on the second floor as well. So that's pretty incriminating.
Mm-hmm.
Pretty incriminating right there.
Yeah, there's no denying that.
Before the search was finished on Robert's property, the police assembled a special task force of 11 detectives and one sergeant to exclusively focus on Robert's case. They extensively researched his history, discovering he was well known to the city's male sex workers and having earned a reputation for preying on transient young men. A lot of these male sex workers refused to accept Robert as a client because of his insistence for drugging, injecting, and torturing his sexual partners and acquaintances. He had also been a suspect in the disappearance of the two men whose personal possessions had been found in the house, Jerry Howell and James Ferris. He had also been questioned in relation to those disappearances but denied having anything to do with it. He had been placed under surveillance, but the police had been unable to find anything solid linking him to either disappearance. James Ferris's wife identified him in several of the Polaroids that were found on the property, some taken after her husband's death, which that would be hard. You couldn't have found somebody else to
look through those?
Yeah. I wouldn't want to look through these for Robbie. That'd scar you for life. Paul Howell formally identified a picture of a young man hanging upside down in Robert's basement as his son, Jerry.
Oh.
Yeah, that would also be heartbreaking, having to see your son like that, you know? Have a distant relative or a friend of the family, somebody else do it. Don't make relatives and loved ones
Do that. Yeah.
But maybe they didn't have anybody else, I don't know. Several detectives were assigned the job of identifying the other men in the photos to determine if they were alive or dead, and if alive, the circumstances of the picture. Since several of the pictures depicted a section of the body of the photographer, on April 13th, Robert was ordered to pose nude for a series of photographs in the same precise angles to compare with the original Polaroid images. Which is that, I mean, you know it's him. Is that necessary?
Right.
But I guess they have to have their evidence, but don't you have enough?
You know what? Like, that's, what do you call it? That's karma.
Yeah, to have to pose
the way you made them pose.
Yeah. Numerous male names had been found written in various stenographer pads, and the detectives began attempting to trace each of them. They found a young man named Freddie Kellogg, who was able to tell the detectives that he and several other men had intermittently stayed with Robert since the early 80s, and that Robert had the habit of giving his lodgers drugs, typically intravenously, before he would engage in sex with them, regardless of whether they consented or not. Freddie stated in order to be allowed to stay with Robert, he had to agree to persuade young men Robert found attractive to attend parties at Robert's home so Robert could drug them. If Robert ever discovered that any of them was a police informant, he would use his knowledge to blackmail them. Despite this threat, Freddie stated that several male sex workers and addicts had been reluctant to engage in any form of conduct with Robert due to the rumors linking him to the 1984 disappearance of Jerry Howell. Freddie was able to name 3 of the men depicted in the Polaroids as Todd Stoops, Robert Sheldon, and Larry Wayne Pearson. The investigators found out that Robert paid a $30 fee to secure a bond for Larry in June of 1987, and that no further records existed to indicate that Larry was still alive. Investigators then discovered that in August of 1987, Robert filed an assault report from a hospital room alleging that a man named Larry Person, instead of Pearson, had deeply bitten his penis during oral sex, causing a serious laceration. An interview with Robert Sheldon's employers at a Kansas City manufacturing plant confirmed that although the young man had been a pretty reliable employee, he suddenly stopped coming to work on April of 1985. Soon after the search of Robert's home at 4315 Charlotte Street had finished, Robert was informed of the discoveries found on his property. The same afternoon, he was ordered to pose for the nude photographs for the comparisons. Investigators attempted to conduct their first formal interview with him, but he simply invoked his right to remain silent. Investigators later obtained handwriting samples from Robert in an effort to prove that he had been the one to write the notes found within the various stenographers' pads. He refused to cooperate and was sentenced to 6 months in jail for contempt of court. With the huge stack of evidence against him, Robert had no choice but to plead guilty. He agreed to tell everything about the horrific murders he conducted to avoid the death penalty. The families of the victims were outraged with the deal. Paul Howell, the father of Jerry Howell, told the New York Times in 1988, quote, "I think he should have gotten the death penalty," end quote, which I agree.
Mm-hmm. I agree.
On December 19th, 1988, Robert formally waived his rights to be tried for any of the outstanding murder charges upon the understanding he was to be convicted of one further count of first-degree murder, that of Robert Sheldon, and 4 counts of second-degree murder. He formally pleaded guilty to each of these charges before Judge Robert Mayers in the Jackson County Circuit Court. Members of the public were prohibited from attending this hearing, with only family members of the victims and news reporters permitted access to the proceedings. In response to these guilty pleas, Judge Mayers imposed 5 further concurrent life sentences, with an additional condition barring any future prospect of parole in the sole case of first-degree murder to which Robert pleaded guilty. So I was talking to a coworker, I won't say her name, about our podcast and, different horrible men that we've covered, and not just men, but people in general. And I was saying, I'm for the death penalty. And she was saying she's against it, but thinks that they should have done to them exactly what they did to other people.
I agree with that.
I do not.
Really?
And this was my thought process on it.
I feel like eye for an eye.
Yeah, but who are you going to make do that to them? Then you're putting that karma on that person then.
Well,
aren't they going to be just as bad?
But you have the executioners who pull the switch, who do the gas chamber, who...
That is a lot different than torturing somebody. That is a lot different than raping somebody.
Yeah, I don't know about raping them, but...
I mean, just injecting.
Like, injecting them. That, like what he did, putting stuff under his fingernails, or not even that. Just kill them how you killed them. Just don't go as far as torturing them and doing all that stuff. No. Like, if they killed you by strangulation, then you kill them by strangulation.
I don't want to put that karma on anybody else.
See,
just be done with them.
How does it feel to die like they died?
And you know what? Let them deal with that in their next life.
I feel like the executioners all have karma, like have to deal with that anyway. Have to deal with that guilt because they're the ones that they have that guilt anyway. I would think I would. I don't want anybody to die, but I feel like some people really deserve it, like that.
Yeah, he deserved to die. Like, he should have been put down. What
is he, an animal? Pretty
much. Yes, he is, in fact. In the years following his 1988 convictions and incarceration, Robert granted an interview to the Missouri-based television station KCPT and corresponded with numerous individuals. To all concerned, he attempted to restore his image as a sensitive citizen who had simply made mistakes
Bullshit.
in committing these crimes. He further claimed he had been demonized unfairly by media before, during, and after his arraignment and plea bargains, and that the police ineptitude had resulted in his being allowed to remain at liberty following his first murder. I mean, that kind of seemed. You had him under surveillance for the disappearance of Jerry.
Mm-hmm.
You were already, how did you not see him taking these other people?
Yeah.
If he's under surveillance. That sounds like you're not surveilling very good.
You're not doing your job.
Robert also lodged several complaints with prison officials regarding prison conditions. He also wrote several letters to a local minister claiming that prison officials knew of his high blood pressure, yet were not providing him with his prescribed heart medication. Wham. At 2:00 p.m. on October 8, 1992, Robert complained to prison staff of severe heart pains and was taken from his cell to the prison infirmary. Medical staff determined his heart was unstable and called for an ambulance. Robert was taken to a hospital in Columbia, Missouri, where he was pronounced dead from a heart attack at 3:55 p.m. He was 43 years old. Shortly after, the judge that oversaw his trial, Alvin Randall, was informed of Robert's death. In response, Judge Randall sarcastically remarked, quote, "Couldn't have happened to a nicer guy," end quote. According to published reports, although Robert had a depressive personality disorder, he was also a diagnosed sexual sadist who gained extreme sexual gratification from the humiliation, pain, and torture to which he had subjected his victims. Robert never expressed any amount of remorse for his actions and referred to his victims as play toys in an interview he granted shortly before his death. Robert's house was purchased by a local businessman for an undisclosed sum in December of 1988. The property was later demolished. And to that, I say good riddance.
See you, bye.
So long. That was a heavy one.
Yeah.
Like, it's been a while since we've had a lot of torture.
Torture.
Yeah. I don't like torture. That's like the Saw movies. I can't do the Saw movies.
I can, but I can't. Like, I can watch them, but then I'm like,
it makes me sick, like, physically.
ugh.
It just makes me nauseous. I like the spooky stuff. I think we spoke about this before on here. The
weird stuff, yeah.
That, or just like obviously fake gore. Like,
it's so cheesy.
Yeah, so cheesy. Yeah. Like the
like Friday the 13th.
Or
when the thing comes up and kills Johnny Depp.
Johnny Depp, did he die in the waterbed?
Oh no, that was Freddy. Who was the one in Friday the 13th? Oh crap. He's a known actor. I'm gonna look it up now.
I don't remember. But no, like Kill Bill with all the blood spraying, or Santa's sleigh with the wrestler Goldberg in it. That was hilarious. That Thanksgiving Day horror movie, that was ridiculous. And
Kevin Bacon.
Kevin Bacon.
But yeah.
But if it's cheesy and obviously fake, I'm okay with it. Like, I can handle it. But when it's real looking, that lady having to cut the key out of her eyeball, how do you even get in there? Well, he cut her eye first.
I know.
Put it in there. It's too fucked up for me, because you just know that somebody's sick mind thought of that because it's in a movie. Like, somebody thought of that. Somebody thought of doing that.
Right.
And that's fucked up.
Yeah.
And it makes me sick because somebody could do it then. It's not a ghosty or something ridiculous. Like in Thanksgiving Day, spoiler alert,
I still haven't seen that.
he puts one lady in a giant oven, and so she comes out and looks like a turkey, like a giant turkey. Like, it's silly.
Yeah.
I don't do the torture stuff.
Yeah.
But
to each their own.
yeah, we're done with that now.
Yep.
And this is our last one for January. So we'll be starting February.
Yep.
Next week. So stay tuned for that.
Yep.
Maybe we can find a lovebird one. Maybe. We'll see.
It'll be like Bonnie and Clyde. No.
I try to find ones I haven't heard of before.
Me too.
Which it's hard because everybody's done everybody. So it's hard to find one that you haven't heard too much about. But we try. That being said, if you have any stories of spooky ghosties visiting you, or glitches in the Matrix, or any true crime stories you want us to cover, send us an email at spinechillingchatspodcast@gmail.com.
Mm-hmm.
Or you can go to our website, www.spine-chillingchatspodcast.com. And there's a link on there to email us through that, so you don't have to go through your email.
Links of old episodes, our merch store, just
our bios on there, so
Yeah.
you can get to know us a little better.
Yeah.
We have our pictures from our Halloween spooky shoot, which was a lot of fun.
It was so much fun. Mike makes fun of me for it because he's like, "You guys are weird taking pictures in a graveyard," and I'm like,
No, it was so much fun. I want to do it again this year, but I don't want to do the same. So we have to come up with something else.
Something different, yeah.
But that was a lot of fun.
It was fun.
It was a bonding experience.
So find us on Facebook, Instagram,
TikTok while we have it.
YouTube.
Yep.
All the things.
And if you're just listening to this, if you go on YouTube, we have video, so you can see us too.
Yeah.
And I think that's it.
That's it.
Yeah. We hope you liked this.
We'll see you next week.
We hope you come back. And most of all, we hope you
Keep it spooky.
Bye, guys.
Bye.